Chicago, Illinois. Would you stand your ground when everything is against you? Chicago, Illinois. The city buzzed with movement, cars honking, pedestrians rushing down the streets, but inside the courtroom there was nothing but silence and tension. Attorney Naomi Williams sat at the defense table, her hands clasped, her mind sharp and focused. She had fought many legal battles, but this one was different. Naomi was no ordinary lawyer. She was brilliant, fearless, and relentless. A defense attorney known for taking cases no one else dared to touch. When the system buried the truth, she dug it back up. And today, she was facing one of her biggest challenges yet. Her client, Isaiah Brooks, a young black man, had been wrongfully accused of assaulting an officer. But Naomi knew the truth. The officer in question had been the real aggressor. Isaiah had been beaten, arrested, and thrown into a cell for a crime he didn't commit. The prosecution had no real case, but they had something else, the system on their side. The Chicago Police Department wanted this case to disappear. They wanted Naomi to back down, to settle, to let them rewrite the story like they always did. But she refused. She wasn't just fighting for Isaiah. She was fighting for every innocent person the system had tried to break. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back row, their pens ready to capture every detail. Protesters filled the gallery, their presence a silent reminder that justice had been denied too many times before. Naomi could feel the weight of expectation pressing against her, but pressure had never scared her. It only fueled her. The judge entered, his robe billowing as he took his seat. Court is now in session. Naomi straightened her back. She turned to Isaiah, who sat beside her, his hands shaking slightly beneath the table. "Stay strong," she whispered. "We've got the truth on our side." He nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. He had seen too many people like him railroaded by the system. He wasn't sure if the truth was ever enough. The prosecution was smug. They had their witnesses lined up, their evidence tailored to fit their version of events. But Naomi had something they didn't expect. She had proof. And she was ready to dismantle every lie, brick by brick. This wasn't just a case. It was a battle for justice. Would you stand your ground when everything is against you? Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Isaiah Brooks never saw it coming. He was just walking home after visiting a friend, hands in his pockets, earbuds in, when the flashing blue and red lights cast a glow on the pavement in front of him. He froze as two officers stepped out of the squad car, their hands already hovering near their holsters. "Stop right there," one of them ordered. Isaiah pulled out his earbuds, his heartbeat picking up. "What's going on?" "You match the description of a suspect," the officer continued. "We need to ask you a few questions." Isaiah had heard those words before. Every young black man he knew had. He forced himself to stay calm. What suspect? What crime? The officer didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer. "Turn around. Hands where we can see them." Isaiah stiffened. "I didn't do anything wrong." And that was all it took. Before he could react, Sergeant Harris grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Isaiah stumbled, caught off guard. He barely had time to protest before he was slammed against the patrol car. The air rushed from his lungs as cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. "Stop resisting," Harris growled. "I'm not resisting," Isaiah protested, his voice rising in panic. "What are you doing?" Harris didn't answer. Instead, he shoved Isaiah to the ground, pressing a knee into his back as the second officer pulled out his radio. "We have a suspect in custody," he reported, his tone smooth, practiced. Like this was routine. The official report would later claim Isaiah had struck Sergeant Harris escalating the situation. But the truth, a security camera across the street captured everything. The officers approaching Isaiah with aggression, Harris shoving him first, then forcing him to the ground. Not once did Isaiah fight back, but evidence was only useful if it saw the light of day. By the time Naomi Williams got the case, Isaiah had already spent weeks behind bars, his trial date looming. The officers had their version of events locked in. The body cam footage from the arrest, conveniently missing. The prosecution had built their case on the word of 2 officers, men who had sworn to uphold the law, but had instead twisted it to their advantage. Naomi sat across from Isaiah in the holding cell, studying him. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. "Tell me everything," she said. He did, every detail, every word exchanged, every second of the nightmare that had led him here. When he finished, Naomi's jaw was tight. "They set you up," she said, her voice low but firm. "This was never about justice. This was about power." Isaiah swallowed hard. "So what now?" She leaned forward. "Now? We fight." Isaiah exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his circumstances. "Do you really think we can win?" Naomi's gaze never wavered. "I don't take cases I plan on losing." The fluorescent lights above them buzzed faintly, casting sharp shadows across the cold concrete walls. Somewhere down the hall, another cell door clanked shut. Isaiah glanced toward the noise, his mind racing. He had seen too many men in his position lose hope, accept their fate, become another statistic. But something in Naomi's voice, in the unwavering determination in her eyes, made him want to believe. "Okay," he finally said, "let's fight." Naomi knew this was bigger than Isaiah. This was about power, corruption, and accountability. And she wasn't backing down. The system had buried too many innocent men. This time, she would make them answer for it. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, and off-duty police officers filled the seats, their eyes locked on the 2 opposing sides. Some had come for justice. Others had come to make sure justice was never served. Naomi Williams sat at the defense table, her hands steady, her mind sharp. Across the room, Sergeant Harris sat beside his attorneys, his posture relaxed, his expression smug. He thought this would go like every other trial before it. Officers testifying, jurors believing them, and another innocent man condemned. But Naomi had other plans. The judge entered, his presence commanding silence. He adjusted his glasses, then turned his attention to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with cross-examination. Ms. Williams, you may begin." Naomi stood slowly, smoothing her blazer. Her expression was unreadable as she stepped toward the witness stand, where Sergeant Harris sat with practiced ease. He had lied under oath before. He wasn't worried about today. "Sergeant Harris," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm, "tell the court what happened the night you arrested Isaiah Brooks." Harris sat up straighter. "Isaiah Brooks attacked me without provocation," he said, his tone confident. "He resisted arrest. I feared for my safety." Naomi smirked. "Say that again, to my face." The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped taking notes. Harris's smug expression faltered for half a second, but he quickly regained composure. "I said," he repeated, "Isaiah Brooks attacked me." Naomi nodded, pacing slowly. "Right. And your partner, Officer Grant, also stated in his report that Mr. Brooks became aggressive. That's correct." She turned on her heel, facing the jury. "And you're both sworn officers, correct?" "Yes." Naomi folded her hands in front of her. "Let's talk about evidence, then." She gestured toward the prosecution's table. "The state claims that Isaiah Brooks struck you first, but there's a security camera from across the street that tells a different story." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Harris's attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Objection," the prosecutor said. "We've already addressed the surveillance footage." The judge nodded. "Miss Williams, stay on course." Naomi turned back to Harris. "I just want the officer to clarify his statement." She pulled a remote from her pocket and pressed a button. The screen behind her flickered to life. The courtroom watched as the footage played. It showed Isaiah standing still, his hands raised. It showed Harris shoving him first, grabbing him, forcing him down. Then the audio played. "Stop resisting." But Isaiah never resisted. He was already on the ground. Gasps echoed through the room. Even the judge's face tightened. The jury leaned in, watching every second, their expressions shifting from neutral to troubled. Naomi let the silence stretch. Then she turned back to Harris. "Sergeant Harris," she said, stepping closer, her voice sharp, "is this what resisting arrest looks like?" Harris's face paled. His jaw tightened. He glanced at his attorney, but no one could save him now. Naomi didn't wait for an answer. She stepped back toward the jury. "The system has relied on officers like Harris to tell their version of events, expecting people to believe them without question." She gestured toward the screen. "But today, we don't have to rely on words. We have the truth." The jury wasn't looking at Naomi anymore. They were staring at Harris. And that was when something unexpected happened. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Every eye was on Naomi Williams as she stood in the center of the floor, her posture unyielding. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment the case would turn. She turned her attention to Sergeant Harris, who sat slouched in the witness stand, his face impassive, his confidence unwavering, at least for now. "You stated your body cam footage was lost," Naomi said, pacing slowly, letting each word settle into the silence. "Correct," Harris replied, looking bored. "A technical failure." Naomi stopped pacing, tilting her head. "A technical failure?" She let out a small, humorless laugh. "How convenient." The prosecutor shifted in his seat. Harris's attorney sat up straighter, sensing something was coming. Naomi turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit new evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Naomi pressed a button on the remote in her hand. The screen behind her flickered to life. "This is footage from a security camera outside a local business, just a few feet away from where the alleged assault took place." The entire courtroom leaned forward. Harris's smirk wavered. The video played. Isaiah Brooks appeared on screen, standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. Then Sergeant Harris and Officer Grant approached him. The courtroom watched as Harris shoved Isaiah, knocking him back. Isaiah raised his hands in surrender. The video zoomed in, capturing Harris gripping Isaiah's arm, twisting it forcefully before slamming him onto the ground. Then came the damning moment. The courtroom heard Harris's voice, crystal clear, "Stop resisting!" But Isaiah wasn't resisting. He was pinned, motionless, under Harris's knee. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the gallery muttered a curse under their breath. Even the judge's expression darkened. Naomi turned back to Harris. "So, Sergeant Harris, were you mistaken or lying?" Harris's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His fingers twitched against the wood of the stand. "That video, it's taken out of context." Naomi crossed her arms. "Oh? Then let's watch it again." She pressed the button, and the footage replayed. Isaiah didn't move. He didn't fight. But Harris still yelled, "Stop resisting!" Silence stretched across the room. The jury's eyes, once indifferent, now burned with judgment. The press scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, capturing the moment everything changed. Harris's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we object." "To what?" Naomi cut in, her voice slicing through the room. "To the truth?" The judge lifted a hand, silencing them. His eyes locked onto Harris. "Sergeant, do you wish to amend your testimony?" Harris's lips pressed together in a thin line. His attorney whispered something, but the damage was done. There was no spinning the truth now. Naomi stepped closer to the jury, her voice firm. For too long, officers like Harris have counted on their word being taken as fact, regardless of the truth. But today, you saw what really happened. Isaiah Brooks didn't resist. He didn't attack anyone. He was attacked. She let the words sink in before delivering her final blow. "So now I ask you, who's really on trial here?" The silence was deafening. And now, the case had shifted. The tension in the courtroom had shifted. The power that Sergeant Harris once held was slipping away, and he knew it. His jaw tightened as he gripped the edges of the witness stand, his fingers twitching with restrained anger. Naomi Williams stood tall, her expression unreadable, her confidence unwavering. She had seen this before, the moment when a guilty man, so used to controlling the narrative, realized he was losing control. "You stated your body cam footage was lost," Naomi said, pacing in front of him, her voice calm but pointed. "Correct," Harris replied, attempting to sound unfazed. Naomi turned to the jury. "But now, we have clear video evidence showing Isaiah Brooks never resisted, never attacked, and never posed a threat." Harris shifted in his seat. "That video doesn't show everything." "Oh." Naomi tilted her head, her eyebrows raised. "Then why did you say your footage was lost?" Harris's face reddened slightly. Because it would expose the truth?" Naomi interrupted, stepping closer, her voice razor-sharp. The jury whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Naomi and Harris. The judge watched intently, his gaze unreadable but heavy with expectation. Harris's fingers curled into a fist. "This is ridiculous!" The outburst echoed through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, the sound of pens scratching against paper the only noise filling the silence. Cameras flashed as photographers captured the moment Harris's carefully controlled demeanor cracked. Naomi took a step back, letting him unravel. Letting the jury see exactly who he was when he wasn't in control of the situation. "Sergeant Harris," Naomi said, her tone even, "you are under oath. Do you want to revise your testimony?" His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently in his ear, but it was too late. The damage was done. The jury had seen the shift, the anger, the panic beneath his once composed exterior. Naomi turned to the judge. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "I rest my case." The courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs. Naomi returned to her seat, her expression unreadable. Isaiah Brooks, seated beside her, exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath the entire time. Harris sat frozen in the witness stand, his face tight, his shoulders stiff. He had walked into this courtroom believing he was untouchable. But now, he looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. And that was when everything changed. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Every eye was on the jury box, waiting for the words that would decide the future of two men. One wrongly accused, the other finally facing the consequences of his actions. Naomi Williams sat motionless, her hands folded in front of her, her heart steady. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to the jury. The judge adjusted his glasses and turned to the jury foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, A middle-aged woman with a firm but solemn expression stood. "We have, Your Honor." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Isaiah Brooks swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the edge of the defense table. His mother sat behind him, her hands clasped together, silently praying. The judge nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson cleared her throat. "On the charge of assaulting an officer, we find the defendant, Isaiah Brooks, not guilty." For a split second, the room was frozen in disbelief. Then, an explosion of sound, cheers, cries, gasps of relief. Isaiah's mother broke down in tears, clutching her son's father as they wept together. Naomi let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her. Isaiah covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking, overcome with emotion. The injustice that had held him captive for so long had finally been lifted. But it wasn't over yet. The judge raised a hand, calling for silence. The room quieted once more. The foreperson continued, her voice unwavering. "On the charge of falsifying a police report, we find Sergeant Harris guilty." A stunned silence followed. Then, shock rippled through the courtroom. Officers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. For once, one of their own was being held accountable. Harris sat motionless, his face drained of color. His hands gripped the arms of his chair as if grounding himself. His entire career, his reputation, everything he had built, was crumbling in front of him. His lawyer whispered something urgently, but Harris didn't respond. He knew there was no coming back from this. Naomi glanced at the jury. Some of them still looked shaken by their own decision. But she saw no regret. They had done what so many before them had failed to do. They had chosen justice over blind loyalty to authority. The judge spoke, his voice firm. "Sergeant Harris, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date." He turned to Isaiah. "Mr. Brooks, you are free to go." A sob of relief escaped from Isaiah's mother. Naomi reached over and gave Isaiah's hand a firm squeeze before he stood, his legs trembling beneath him. He turned toward his family, and before he could take another step, his mother rushed forward, wrapping him in a fierce embrace. The sound of cameras clicking filled the room. Reporters scribbled down notes. The public had waited for this moment, a rare instance of accountability in a system that rarely delivered it. Naomi exhaled, closing her eyes for a brief second. Justice, for once, had been served. But what happened next stunned everyone. Naomi Williams stepped outside the courthouse, and the moment her foot hit the pavement, chaos erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted over one another, their voices blending into an indecipherable roar. The crowd outside had doubled in size, filled with supporters, activists, and those who had waited years for a case like this to end the way it had. "Ms. Williams, how does it feel to win such a big case?" a reporter called out. Naomi paused, her expression steady, composed. A small smile played at her lips, but she shook her head. "It's not about me," she said, her voice carrying over the noise. "It's about truth. It's about justice." The cameras flashed again. A movement in the crowd caught her eye. Isaiah Brooks, standing with his family. He was free. Finally free. His mother clutched his arm tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, this victory might disappear like a dream. That night, after the celebrations had died down, Isaiah and his family visited Naomi's office. The atmosphere was quieter, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. Isaiah stepped forward. "I don't know how to thank you." Naomi leaned back in her chair, studying the young man who had just won his freedom. He looked different already, lighter, like someone who had been carrying a boulder on his back for too long and had finally set it down. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Just live your life. Be free." Isaiah nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. His mother wiped away a tear, squeezing his hand. "You gave us our son back," she whispered. Naomi smiled, but deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. The system wasn't perfect. Far from it. There would be more cases like Isaiah's, more young men wrongfully accused, more families torn apart. But today, for once, the system had listened. As Isaiah and his family left, Naomi stared out her office window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. This was only the beginning. She had won a case that day, but in the end, she had sparked a movement. Would you have done what Naomi did? Share this story if you believe in standing up for justice.